Welcome back, deep divers. Today, we're going deep, really deep, into a topic that's, well, about as heavy as it gets. White supremacy. Yeah, it's one of those things that, you might think is a relic of the past, but we're going to show you how it's still very much alive and kicking in today's world. Our guide for this deep dive is an article called Inside the Mind of a White Supremacist: Myth versus Reality. It was written by Allison Rowe and published this year, 2025, on her website, roweeminround.com. So get ready, folks. We're about to equip you with the knowledge to critically evaluate the information swirling around out there about this incredibly important topic.
It's definitely more relevant now than ever, unfortunately.
Right. Like you think, oh, we dealt with that already. But this article really opens your eyes.
It does. And, before we dive into the myths and all that, it's important to define what we're actually talking about here. White supremacy, at its core. It's not just about, individual prejudice.
Like someone being racist, right?
Yeah, it goes way beyond that. It's a whole system, a system of beliefs and actions that aim to establish and maintain the dominance of white people over everyone else.
Dominance. That's the key word there, right? It's not just feeling superior. It's about actively seeking power and control.
Absolutely. And that power, it manifests in so many ways. We all know the blatant kind, the in-your-face kind, like the KKK rallies, or hate speech. Yeah, blatant discrimination.
The stuff you see on the news and just makes you cringe, right?
Exactly. But this article digs into something even more insidious, you could say.
Uh-oh. What's that?
The covert forms of white supremacy. These are the systems and practices that, well, they kind of uphold racial inequality, but often without, explicitly stating their racist intent.
So sneaky. So it's like a wolf in sheep's clothing. It looks all innocent on the surface, but underneath it's all about maintaining that power structure.
Exactly. And that actually leads us to one of the first myths the article tackles head on. The idea that white supremacists are just, a bunch of uneducated,
like backwoods hillbilly types.
Yeah, clinging to these outdated ideas.
Okay, I admit I used to think that too, but I have a feeling it's not that simple, is it?
Not at all. The article actually points out how many white supremacists are, get this, highly educated.
Really?
Yeah, they use their knowledge, often in very twisted ways, to construct these complex arguments that, well, on the surface, can seem very convincing.
So it's not about a lack of education. It's about twisting information to fit their existing worldview.
Bingo. It's not ignorance, it's ideology. And you know what? This brings us to another myth the article debunks. The idea that white supremacy only targets, well, racial and ethnic minorities.
Okay, yeah, I think a lot of people assume that. But after reading this article, I realized how much broader their hatred actually is.
Right. It's not so straightforward. While minorities are often their, primary targets, white supremacist ideology often goes hand in hand with other forms of bigotry. Anti-Semitism, for example, is deeply intertwined with their beliefs.
So they hate Jewish people too?
Yeah, they see Jewish people as this threat to their vision of racial purity and dominance.
It's like this tangled web of hate, It branches out to attack anyone they see as other or a threat to their power structure or whatever.
Exactly. They create these elaborate conspiracy theories.
Right.
About, Jewish control and influence, which, well, they use those to justify their actions.
Even violent.
Even violent, yeah.
So it's not just, racially motivated. It's about anyone who challenges their narrow worldview.
You got it. And that includes, and this is interesting, immigrants.
Okay, but wait, wouldn't some immigrants be considered white by their standards?
You would think, right. But that's where their ideology gets all, inconsistent.
Yeah.
And often illogical.
It's all messed up.
It is. For white supremacists, it's not simply about skin color. It's about maintaining a specific hierarchy of power and control, one that, of course, benefits them and excludes anyone they deem, well, undesirable.
So messed up. This really shows how white supremacy's reach extends far beyond what a lot of people realize. It targets a whole spectrum of people and ideas, all in the service of maintaining their twisted vision of a perfect world or whatever. Which brings us to another myth this article tackles. The idea that white supremacists are just this fringe group on the decline.
Oh, if only that were true.
I used to believe that. I thought, as older generations die off, these hateful ideas will die with them.
That's a nice thought, but unfortunately that's far from the truth.
So it's actually growing.
Sadly, yes. The Southern Poverty Law Center, they track hate groups. They've reported a significant increase in the number of white supremacist organizations over the past decade.
Wow. So it's not fading away like we hoped it would.
Not at all. And recent events, both political and social, coupled with the rise of social media, have given them even more visibility and even recruiting power, you could say.
It's like they've found new ways to spread their message and reach new audiences.
Exactly. They've managed to infiltrate mainstream conversations
Hmm.
and appeal to, well, a wider audience, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it's scary how subtle they can be. Just the other day I was scrolling through like an online gaming forum. Seemed totally harmless, right?
Yeah.
And I stumbled across some blatant white supremacist rhetoric. It was really unsettling, to see it pop up in such an unexpected place.
That's a perfect example of how this ideology has moved beyond the fringes,
Yeah.
into those everyday spaces.
It's like they've gone digital camo, blended right into the online world.
Exactly. And that brings us to perhaps the most dangerous myth of all, the idea that white supremacy will simply fade away with time.
Yeah, like I was saying earlier, I used to think that too. But this article just totally shattered that illusion.
It's wishful thinking, but history shows us that that's not how it works. White supremacy it's deeply ingrained in our systems and culture.
It's like a virus that mutates to become resistant to any cure. So how do we even begin to combat something that's so adaptable and so deeply rooted?
Well, I think the first step is understanding why people are drawn to this ideology in the first place.
Mm.
What are the underlying motivations that lead them to embrace such hate?
Okay, so let's delve into that. The article explores this why factor, right? What insights does it offer?
One key factor is, well, fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of, losing one's identity, fear of social change.
It's like they're clinging to the familiar, even if it's harmful, because change is scary.
Exactly. And for those who already feel, marginalized or disenfranchised, white supremacy offers them this twisted sense of belonging and empowerment.
It's like a dark kind of comfort, right?
Yeah, tell them they're not failures, they're victims. Victims of a system rigged against them by, the other.
That's a powerful draw, to be told that you're not to blame for your struggles.
Right. That it's all someone else's fault. It feeds into that need for validation and a desire to blame someone for their perceived shortcomings.
And it ties into the whole identity thing we talked about before, too. Like, these groups offer a ready-made identity, a community.
The sense of belonging, yeah.
It's like they're filling a void, a need for connection that isn't being met elsewhere in their lives.
You hit the nail on the head. Think about it. We all crave belonging, purpose, a sense of significance, But these groups, they exploit that basic human need, and they twist it into something harmful and destructive.
And sadly, as we've been saying, the internet and social media have become powerful tools for that exploitation.
Absolutely. The online world, it's become a breeding ground for hate.
It's terrifying how easily it spreads online.
It offers, anonymity, rapid information spread,
Mm.
and the ability to create these echo chambers where extremist views are, well, they're constantly reinforced.
Like a digital echo chamber. And what's even more concerning? It's not always overt hate speech. It can be disguised as, like, free speech, patriotism, even social justice.
Oh, yeah, they're good at that. Using those dog whistles in coded language to appeal to a wider audience and, of course, evade detection.
It's insidious.
It is. And unfortunately, the algorithms that drive these platforms, they often end up reinforcing those echo chambers.
It's like those algorithms are unwitting accomplices, guiding people towards increasingly extreme content without them even realizing it.
Yeah, they might start by reading an article about immigration, for example, and the next thing you know, they're being bombarded with white supremacist propaganda.
It's scary how easily it can happen.
It is. And that's why digital literacy and critical thinking skills are so important now.
More than ever.
We need to be able to discern fact from fiction, recognize those manipulative tactics, and, evaluate information sources critically.
We need to be savvy digital citizens, not just passive consumers of all this online content.
Exactly. But that's a huge challenge, right?
Yeah.
Especially with the sheer volume of information we're all bombarded with every single day.
It's overwhelming.
It is. But we can't afford to be complacent. We need to educate ourselves and our communities about the dangers of online extremism and equip ourselves with the tools to combat it.
It's like a digital arms race. We need to be one step ahead of them.
Exactly. We need to understand their methods, debunk their myths, expose the lies that fuel their hate, and we need to do it in a way that's accessible and engaging, using the same platforms they use to reach vulnerable individuals.
So it's not just about shutting down these platforms or censoring them. It's about actively combating their message with truth, empathy, and understanding.
You got it. We need to be proactive, not reactive.
Right, meeting height with reason, ignorance with knowledge, fear with compassion.
Exactly.
This makes me think about the article's focus on debunking those myths. It's not just about correcting misinformation, it's about dismantling the very foundation of their ideology.
You're absolutely right. By exposing those lies and distortions that prop up white supremacy, we can help people see it for what it truly is, a dangerous and destructive ideology, one that has no place in a just and equitable society.
So it's about empowering people to think critically, to question their assumptions, and to reject the seductive allure of hate. It's about offering a different path, one based on inclusion, understanding, and respect for all.
That's the ultimate goal, isn't it? To
Yeah.
create a world where everyone feels valued and respected, regardless of their race, ethnicity, religion, anything.
A world where difference is celebrated, not feared. A world where diversity is seen as a strength, not a threat.
Exactly. It's a powerful vision, but one worth fighting for.
Absolutely. And that fight starts with each and every one of us. So
Yeah.
what can we as individuals do to combat this? The article offers some specific strategies, right?
It does. It highlights the importance of a multi-pronged approach that involves education, community engagement, and policy reform.
Okay, so we need to tackle this from all angles.
That's right, if we want to make a real and lasting impact.
Okay, let's break that down. What do those strategies look like in practice? So multi-pronged approach. Sounds complicated.
It's about addressing the problem from different angles.
Yeah.
And the article really emphasizes education as a crucial starting point.
Education always seems to be the answer, right? But what does that actually look like when we're talking about something as deeply rooted as white supremacy?
It's about going beyond the surface level. We need comprehensive curricula in schools that address racism, not just as a historical event, but as a present-day reality.
So not just teaching about slavery and the civil rights movement, but connecting it to what's happening today.
Exactly. Kids need to learn to think critically about, diversity, tolerance, inclusion, and understand how systemic racism operates.
Give them the tools to recognize and dismantle prejudice in all its sneaky forms.
Right. And, education isn't confined to just classrooms.
Oh, right.
It's also about ongoing dialogue and learning within our communities.
Okay, so like what? Community workshops, book
Yeah.
clubs.
Those are great examples. Think about local organizations creating spaces for people of different backgrounds to connect, share their experiences, and, build genuine understanding.
That makes sense. It's about fostering empathy and breaking down those barriers that divide us. Because let's be honest, sometimes it's just easier to fear what we don't understand.
Exactly. And alongside education and community engagement, we need to address the systems that perpetuate inequality.
Okay, that sounds big.
It is. That's where policy reform comes in.
So we're talking laws, regulations.
Yeah, things like stronger anti-discrimination laws, robust hate crime legislation, making sure law enforcement agencies are trained to recognize and address white supremacist activity effectively.
So it's about creating a legal and social framework that makes it clear that hate is not tolerated.
Exactly. Sending a powerful message that these ideologies have no place in our society.
But it's not solely the responsibility of lawmakers or educators, right? It feels like something we all have a role to play in.
You're absolutely right.
So, like, what can we do as individuals? I mean, it can feel daunting, like, what can one person really do in the face of such a massive problem?
That's where the everyday actions come in.
Okay, give us some examples.
Educating ourselves,
Mhm.
challenging racist language and behavior when we see it, supporting organizations working to combat hate. Even seemingly small actions can have a ripple effect.
So you're saying those small acts of resistance matter?
They absolutely do. Every single one of us can make a difference. It's about refusing to be silent in the face of injustice, using our voices, our platforms, our everyday actions to chip away at these harmful ideologies.
So speaking up, speaking out, and refusing to be bystanders.
You got it. And sometimes that means having those difficult conversations with, people who hold these beliefs.
Yeah, those conversations can be so uncomfortable.
They can be, but they're important. We need to engage, challenge their assumptions, offer alternative perspectives.
Do you really think you can change someone's mind like that?
It's not always about changing their mind on the spot. Think of it as planting seeds of doubt. You might not change their mind right then and there, but you might make them think twice.
Okay, and that's a start. It's about disrupting those echo chambers, introducing new information, showing them that their worldview isn't the only one.
Right. Reminding them that there's a whole world of perspectives out there, and that diversity, empathy, and understanding are far more enriching than than hate and division.
This all comes back to education, doesn't it? Not just in the formal sense, but in the way we interact with each other, consume information, challenge our own biases.
It's a lifelong process, really, unlearning those harmful beliefs, being open to new perspectives, and constantly striving to be, well, better, more informed, more compassionate citizens of the world.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today, unpacking those myths surrounding white supremacy, understanding its psychological appeal, and exploring those strategies for combating it. This has been a true deep dive.
It has, but a necessary one, I think.
Absolutely. And as always, we want to leave you, our listener, with something to ponder, something to spark further reflection and maybe even action.
Well, if there's one thing I want you to remember from this deep dive, it's this. Knowledge is power. The more we understand about white supremacy, its history, its tactics, its psychological appeal, the better equipped we are to fight it.
It's about recognizing that this isn't just some problem out there. It's something that, it permeates our society, our institutions, even our own minds.
Exactly. And it's a fight worth having, a fight for a more just, equitable, and compassionate world. A world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive, regardless of the color of their skin.
Wow, powerful stuff. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. We hope you found it informative, thought-provoking, and empowering.
And remember, the fight for a better world starts with each one of us.
So we've talked about education and community engagement, but what about these policy reforms? What do those look like in real life?
Well, it's about creating laws and systems that actively discourage and punish hate-motivated actions.
So tougher laws against hate crimes.
Yeah, exactly. And making sure those laws are actually enforced.
Right, because what good is a law if it's not enforced?
Exactly. It's also about things like anti-discrimination policies in housing, employment, education, making sure everyone has equal opportunities regardless of their race or ethnicity.
Leveling the playing field, so to speak.
It's a
But, okay, these are all big picture things. What can we do as individuals, in our everyday lives?
Well, I think it starts with awareness, right? Educating ourselves about the different forms that white supremacy can take. Because it's not always as obvious as a burning cross or, a swastika.
Right, like we talked about before, it can be really subtle.
It can be embedded in our language, our institutions, even our own unconscious biases.
So it's about being more mindful of our own thoughts and actions.
Exactly. And then it's about speaking up.
Speaking up.
When we see or hear something that's racist or discriminatory, even if it's uncomfortable,
Calling people out.
it doesn't have to be confrontational, but we need to let people know that kind of behavior is not acceptable.
So it's about setting boundaries.
Yeah, and being an ally to those who are targeted by white supremacy.
Being an ally, what does that look like in practice?
It can mean a lot of things. It can be as simple as amplifying the voices of people of color, sharing their stories, supporting their businesses. It can also mean donating to organizations that are working to combat racism and promote equality.
Right, putting our money where our mouth is.
Exactly. And ultimately, I think being an ally means being willing to have those tough conversations.
You mean like with people who hold white supremacist views?
Yeah, because silence is complicity, right?
So we can't just ignore it and hope it goes away.
We have to engage with it, challenge it, dismantle it.
Wow, this is a lot to take in.
It is.
But it's so important.
It is. Because ultimately, this is about creating a world that's more just and equitable for everyone.
A world where everyone feels safe and valued.
Exactly.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap things up.
I agree.
This deep dive has been, eye-opening to say the least.
It has been.
But ultimately, I think it's given us, some hope.
Yeah.
In some concrete ways that we can all make a difference.
I hope so.
So to our listeners out there, thank you for joining us on this journey. Remember, knowledge is power, and the fight for a better world starts with each one of us.
Absolutely.
Until next time, deep divers, stay curious, stay engaged, and stay hopeful.